You're listening to the Need I Remind You podcast with Yolanda Youngblood. I am me is she, and let's get into it. So this is a part 2 of a series of mental health episodes. I will be sharing more about my mental health journey, my mental health story, from the past 3 years in particular. And before I jump into the details of the episode, I just wanted to do a personal check-in with myself and ask myself, how am I feeling right now in this moment today? And I am feeling calm. I'm feeling grateful, excited, and a bit unsure about which direction I'm going to go as I open up my voice channel around my mental health story in particular. There's some sensitive material here that I've been working through, that I've been healing through over the past 3 years. And I'm very proud of myself. And I want to shout it to the rooftops, my testimony. And I'm also mindful that I ain't got to tell everybody everything, So as I speak, I know there'll be moments of hesitation and blanks like that that will come up as I just try to navigate how I want to tell my story. As I mentioned in the last episode of the mental health part 1, I have been telling my mental health story in so many ways already. And it has been beautiful to journal about it, to talk to my family about it, to be in peer support spaces, to be in conversation with complete strangers, or to just, read a good book and witness other people's lived experiences. It's really a transformative path that I've been on for a while. And a lot of times I have been stuck on the outcome or the product of what a story will look like coming out of me, whether that be a book or an article or a podcast even. But essentially it's whatever comes up is whatever comes out. And I'm in a state of my life where I am not as consumed or concerned about how that comes out. I'm just grateful for the being and the action and the love, most importantly, behind the action. So if you're here, I'm grateful. If you need to take a break from this content, I encourage it. Mental health is a topic that has come up a lot lately, and I've hesitated with, okay, where do I need to lend my voice, or does my voice need to be lent in this way? There's so many great podcasts and books and information. There's just so much already out there. What am I adding? And well, I'm always adding Yolanda and my uniqueness, but I'm also adding the opportunity to connect with other people like minds who resonate with this information, or who can who want to get to know me, or any individual on a deeper, more intimate level that is going beyond small talk, that's going beyond, the glossed over, polished, imprint that we put on people when we meet people or when we've interacted with people. So if you've met me, or if you think you know me, or we've connected before, I always invite people to be curious, to learn more, to ask me questions. I love questions. I love comments. I love to hear what people are resonating with and what's coming up for them. I love listening to people's stories. And so as I've been listening to other people's stories, I'm like, yeah, my story matters too. Like I'm I'm no better than anybody else. I'm consuming content just like everybody else. I'm watching movies, I'm watching documentaries, I'm watching interviews after interviews, listening to podcasts, reading so many books. And at a certain point, it's like, okay, where's my voice? Like, what am I saying? And what is coming up for me that I want to express, that I want to create, and that only I can, because Spirit has called me to do that. And so that's what brings me here personally. And again, as you are listening to my story, please, please, please take care of yourself. As a reminder, mental health is a topic that I will be speaking on, specifically involuntary hospitalization, throughout my story. Not on this episode, but throughout my story, I will be also speaking about traumatic events, sibling loss, work culture, and burnout. And so we are all human beings, and we all have sensitivities. So I want you to take care of yourself, nourish yourself, get what you need, leave what you don't. I will be doing the same in my own ways. And yeah, I'm just excited to get more into it. So let's get it. So I alluded to it in the last episode that I have experienced multiple involuntary hospitalizations in the past 3 years. The first hospitalization was in Austin, Texas, January 27th, 2021. And that lasted for 4 days. I was held over the weekend. So I was put on a 72-hour hold, but because it was the weekend, I was held an extra day in a psychiatric hospital. And as I mentioned in the last episode, I was admitted while being in a confused state. I did not know what was going on. No one explained anything to me. I was just kind of pushed through the process as many people are in the medical industrial complex. And it was about 36 hours of processing from the emergency room to the psychiatric hospital that I landed in. And I won't get into all the details, but basically you strip down, you're given hospital clothes, and you're given a bed in a shared space. Excuse me. And it's just like where you are. It's where you are, and you're given a schedule. There are other patients. It's a co-ed space, or I was in a co-ed space, and there was levels. I found out later that there's levels to where they place you in the psychiatric hospital, and I think I was in level 2 out of 3, so falling somewhere in the middle of the leveling from my understanding, was done primarily based off of, how calm or aggressive a patient may seem to the staff or to whoever is processing patients, or whatever is on the paperwork from the transferred facility or hospital. And so I was put in level 2 of that facility, and it was a very heartbreaking experience. The I felt the cracks of falling, and I felt the internalization of failure by being there. Because I looked around and I didn't know how it happened. I didn't know how I ended up there. I didn't know what was going on, but I felt as if I had failed at something, at my own well-being or my own health. And I didn't understand why I was put away, if you will, and not spoken to understand what had happened before processing. But, I learned. But as I was in the facility, my main thing, being someone who has moved around and, been the new person in the class multiple times, or in the, moving to a different state or starting a new job, like, I know how to win friends. I know how to, be observant and follow the rules and witness treatment and seeing who's getting favor or who's getting things done and how things are moving. So I'm a very observant individual, and I make sure that, I keep my head on a swivel, but I also make sure that, I'm not isolating myself, because you need people. We all do. So I did have moments of connection with the other patients, and, staff members, not so much, but I was pleasant enough to get by and to not stir any assessment. I don't believe, but eventually I met with the psychiatrist on hand and was processed out, but not before being quickly diagnosed with major depression disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. And, those words just kind of rushed over me. I didn't feel like the physician or the social worker gave me enough context or information to really validate their diagnoses, and so I just kind of ignored it. I didn't really think anything about it, other than the fact that, well, if I have depression, it's because of work. You know what I mean? Like, I accepted that. Like, if I have depression, it's because I'm in a depressing workplace, and I don't want to be there. So that makes sense. Generalized anxiety disorder, I didn't know much about. The social worker mentioned that typically a disorder is given when an event such as what I had been through in hospitalization, that would warrant the label. And again, like that assessment, that evaluation didn't really seem sufficient enough for me, but I heard what she said, and I just took the information with a grain of salt and kept it moving. And of course, I was talking to the other patients, trying to understand what was going on, how people are being discharged, how people are being treated. And it was a lot of just sitting around waiting for the day of discharge, observing people leaving and just trying to understand like when to get excited, when to get hopeful. In the meantime, I called family and made sure that I stayed connected with them. But it was also very difficult for me to speak to people that I loved because I was feeling shame. I was feeling embarrassed. I was feeling, again, like a failure. Like I was trying to get myself out of this hole that I fell in. And I couldn't, give updates or let people know how I was truly feeling because my focus was on getting out and also being safe while in the facility. It was still at the peak of COVID in 2021, and I was wearing a mask, but a lot of people weren't, and being able to just move through this space feeling safe, seeing people, not sanitizing, or it was just very anxiety inducing. And I worried, just for my own health, but then being discharged for my parents' health, because I didn't want anyone to get sick. COVID again had taken so many lives. I didn't want that to be in my direct, immediate family. So I did what I could to stay safe. I did what I could to stay grounded. I walked a lot, even though we had no outdoor time. I still walked a lot in the space. I did take the medication that they offered for helping with sleep because, my goodness, well, a lot of people already know being in a hospital is very hard to sleep in with, people monitoring you in the cold, sterile environment. But being in a psychiatric hospital adds another layer when you have the stigma and the fear around being on the psych ward or being in the psychiatric hospital. You think, oh, people are going to, somebody's going to be chewing on my ear or doing something, doing something to me in the middle of the night. Your mind runs wild, or my mind ran wild. And I really had to ground myself, but I also needed medication to help me with that. And again, like talking to the patients and the other patients, it like really helped me ground because I saw that they were just people. They were just people, and a lot of them were young people. There were a handful of older people in the facility as well, but I would say a majority of the people in the psychiatric hospital were young people. And to just be somebody in their mid-30s, I felt a connection to the younger people, wanting to make sure that they were okay, making sure that they felt seen and heard. That was important to me. So that really helped me ground in that space and feel a connection with myself and with the people around me. So I got out eventually, and as I mentioned, both my parents had traveled to Austin to receive me and to help me through the challenge that I had just been through. The first thing was for me to pack up all my things and get out of Texas. I was already intending to move out of Texas, but that was the plan for them to take me back home to Florida and be around family so that we could really figure some things out. And that's what we did eventually. It took about a month to do that, but we made it back to Florida and I lived my life. I found a therapist. I had a psychiatric nurse practitioner I was working with. I, at the time, I was on disability leave from my job, so I didn't have to deal with that stress or that, I didn't have to deal with them at all, which was wonderful. I did feel like I knew I was going to resign, but I took my disability benefits as an advantage, and I said, absolutely, I'm going to take all the time that I need to just recover and restore my energy before I decide and officially resign from this place, because I know that I could resign right here, right now, but then what? So I made sure that I took my time, and not only was I on disability leave, but I was also on FMLA, which is Family and Marital Law Act, I believe is the acronym, but basically it's job protection while you're on leave so that they cannot fire you while you're out on leave. And so I had my strategy covered, and fortunately the process with the employer was relatively painless. It was still annoying to be checked on and to have to update with paperwork, but for the most part, I was able to focus on my recovery and just restoring my energy. And then 7 months into my disability leave, I returned back to work online virtually. And I really returned just to tie up some strings. And after a month, I resigned officially from not only my job, but from corporate America. I just knew that through that experience that happened to me of wearing my body out to exhaustion to the degree that I did, worrying about the state of the world and of what was happening at work, and worrying about other people, and just ignoring my embodied experience and ignoring, my spirit and my soul. I knew that I did not want to engage in another corporate America role ever again. Never full time. If I was going to engage with corporate America, or any job for that matter, any industry, any job, it would be on my terms, and terms that actually align and empower my spiritual growth. So I knew that just wasn't there where I was. And so I resigned. It felt amazing. It felt liberating. I was at the time taking an antidepressant that I really didn't think that I needed, but I was taking out of blind obedience, if you will. And again, like the depression, I associated it with work. And because I had quit my job, I rationalized that I didn't need this medication anymore. And for all intents and purposes, I didn't need it. I didn't believe that it was helping me in any way. Even if I did need it, I didn't believe in the modality. And so that was a disconnect that I was still experiencing with my own mental and spiritual health. But, I stopped taking the medicine, and I just kept living my life. I kept living my life, and things were going smoothly. And then in July of 2022, 18 months after being hospitalized for the first time, I was hospitalized again for the second time. And this happened in Orlando, Florida, while I was visiting, preparing to be in a wedding. I was excited to see friends. I was excited to get dressed up and be pretty. And I was excited to dance and have a good time. And looking back on that experience, I know that I, again, was not connecting with my spirit. I had been, for the past 18 months since the first experience, really checking boxes, if you will, on the mental health checklist. I said I was going to therapy. I had my nurse practitioner for psychiatry and medication management. I quit my job. I, took care of myself to the best of my ability. I allowed for community care to happen, living with my dad, and living with my mom sometimes, and just being around family members, my granny, and being in closer proximity to my nephews and my sister, and just having so much support. I truly felt like I was okay, and that the first hospitalization in January of 2021 was really about the work culture, and that was not the case, as I found out 18 months later when I was hospitalized again. And when I was hospitalized in Orlando, I was driving and I felt the atmosphere shift, and I slowed down the car, and I stopped the car, and I turned on my emergency brakes, and I got out, and I felt my mind racing, thinking about the end of the world and needing to get to a hospital, and wanting to call someone for help and not knowing who to call. But I managed to call a friend. A couple of people had stopped in traffic to check on me and to ask me what was going on. And I was just, in my altered state of consciousness, trying to explain what I was experiencing while also not being connected to reality and grounding. They didn't know how to help me. They didn't know how to understand what was going on. And so eventually, EMT was called. Not only was EMT called, but police officers were called, and I found myself surrounded by 5 or 6 men in uniform, and I was experiencing erratic behavior, very playful behavior, very strange, but nothing, no violence or cussing or, no lashing out at people or doing anything of that nature, but just being silly and whimsical. And eventually they took me to the hospital, where I calmed down and calmed down enough to the point where one of the police officers had come in to speak to me and get some more information about what was going on. And I was able to speak to him very clearly, very groundedly. But I was exhausted. I could feel my body like straining for room to breathe and for energy to continue to talk to him. And I had to end the conversation and just ask if I could, share more at a later time, because I was just feeling so exhausted. And at that time, the doctor wanted to come in, and I had to send him away as well, because again, I just could not continue to speak clearly. My body had just worn down completely at that point, but I felt good in the sense that I was in a hospital bed and my body was wearing down, and I knew that I could just close my eyes and sleep, and I monitored. And so I felt that, okay, maybe I can just get some sleep finally, because I hadn't been sleeping consistently for 3 or 4 days at that point. And that did not happen. I continued to stay up. I continued to stay up, and the hospital continued to give me drugs that I did not consent to or know about what drugs were being given to me until after doing research and looking up the records and finding out that they had prescribed several antipsychotic drugs to me. And the thing about antipsychotic drugs is if you take them, they have different effects on your body. And for me, my belief was that the antipsychotic drugs that they gave me, or the cocktail of drugs that they gave me, produced a side effect of psychosis and paranoia and hallucination, in combination with my sleep deprivation. And so I was exhibiting all kinds of behavior while in the hospital that had escalated. So I was not becoming more calm and more grounded while in the hospital. It was the opposite. And I don't even want to say the opposite. It was just not grounded and calm. It was, I could not sleep, and they weren't giving me anything to help me sleep. Which that, in my opinion, was what I needed. I needed help sleeping. So eventually, after exhibiting, bizarre behavior, I was singing at the top of my lungs, which I don't find that very bizarre. I sing quite a bit on my regular day. And I actually remembered singing because I was so tired. And it reminds me of a quote in The Color Purple, when Nettie was writing Celie, and Celie asked him why they sing, and Nettie said something along the lines of, they sing, because they're too tired to do anything else. And I felt that. That's how I felt in that hospital, and that's why I sing. Sometimes I sing because I'm happy, and sometimes I'm singing because I'm too tired to do anything else. And just being able to sustain myself in that way, to move about. Friends came and visited me when they could. So that was grounding and helpful, to be witnessed by people who knew me and who loved me and who could just be there and witness and not, quote unquote, try to subdue me or calm me down, but just really wanting to know like how they could support me and keep my family updated as they were trying to make their way to me as well. So all this was happening while in the hospital. I was in the hospital in Orlando, Florida, Altamont Springs for about 2.5 days. And before they transferred me, they finally found something to help me sleep that knocked me out completely. Knocked me out so deeply that I did not even realize that I was being transferred from Orlando Hospital to North Tampa Behavioral Center. And I did not come to until I was arriving at North Tampa and walking into the facility, again, not knowing where I was or what was going on, and laying on the bed and then being knocked out from the drugs. Then when I came to, waking up to one of the male patients standing over me and being so confused by that and so shut down in the freeze nervous system, I just closed my eyes and let that be because I didn't know what was going on, honestly. And it hadn't been the first time that I had been laying down and had a patient stand over me. It happened as well in January of 2021, the first time I was hospitalized. And so when this happened again, it was, more intimidating because of the unfamiliar zone, but also my incapacity to move and to react to this person standing over me. I just laid there. And when I opened my eyes again, they were gone. But I was in North Tampa Behavioral Center for almost a week, I believe. I believe it was 7 days. And that experience was very difficult to be in that facility and to wake up and be stuck, essentially, in this place, not being able to advocate for myself, ask questions, or reverse the decision. Because I would say day one, after I woke up from that transfer drug, whatever they gave me, after I woke up, I was sober mind, clear, functioning, ready to go. But that's just not how that works. So I was still confused as to what was going on and what their process was, because again, nobody explains those details to you. And I was pushed or coerced into signing something that I didn't understand what I was signing, but essentially I had released myself over into their care so that they could extend my hold. Because typically in Florida, when you're Baker acted, you're given 72 hours as a hold But if you sign a piece of paper, you could be held for much longer. And I say much longer, and I know through reading and studying now that my 7-day hold was nothing in compared to what a lot of people experience and are still experiencing to this day, of not having advocacy, or not having their own voice being heard, or not having just not having the mental health law on their side, so that they can self-determine what they need for their mental health care and treatment. And, those things were setting in for me, because as a Black woman, as someone who is aware of our society, aware of the oppressive systems, aware of the lineage that my ancestors endured, aware that that which my people directly endure, the people that I look to the left and right and see endure, the suffering that they've endured with the healthcare system in the United States. And so, all this awareness was bubbling up for me as I couldn't get out of this system. And it really started to infuriate me. It started to get on my nerves. It started to aggravate me. And, I started to pout. I started to resist and ignore. I started to, just get an attitude and just become disgruntled, because it was like, I don't need to be here. Not only don't I want to be here, but I don't need to be here, and y'all are very ineffective at your jobs. So I started to tell people what I was feeling, and that is very actually, it was liberating, but it is also tumultuous for me, because I feel deep in me that I have been suppressing a dragon. And I don't know if other people feel this way, but I feel sometimes that if I truly let people know how I'm feeling in a moment, like I'll like, it'll just be fire coming out. And I don't want to say something that I'll regret, or do something that I'll regret, or lash out and in a violent way, or harm someone's spirit. And so instead, I'll just swallow it and harm my own spirit. And that's not healthy either. And so that experience in North Tampa really taught me how to assert my feelings, but to also crack open, because as I noticed that my attitude, or my snippiness, or the ways that I would resist and ignore the staff and some of the nurses, and how that technique, or that approach, how that just wasn't working for me. Like, they did not care about my attitude. They was giving attitude right back times 10 sometimes. And I witnessed how they would treat other patients, and throwing them into solitary confinement, or rushing them off to the prison system, or threatening them with the jail system if they don't act right, or if they don't do this. And I knew who I was dealing with, and I knew that I had to play the part in order to in order to get what I needed to get, which was interface with the discharging doctor. And so, I stopped with my attitude. I made sure that I ate the food that I needed to eat. I made sure that I joined group, that I went outside as often as I could, as often as they would let us. I made sure that I went to the gym and I did yoga. And when they had an external facilitator and she brought in essential oils, I made sure I, took it in and took every nourishing and empowering thing that I could for my own stability and equanimity. Like, I took it all in so that I could be okay with where I was, and so that I could breathe and relax, because the anger was not helping me. It was not being skillfully applied. So by the time I met with the doctor, I was able to just break down and cry and release like the pain that I had been feeling behind the disrespect and the harm that I was witnessing and that I was experiencing, and the ineffectiveness of the treatment, and how desperately I wanted to get out of there so that I could go and seek effective care, but knowing like North Tampa ain't it. And that's my opinion and my experience, and I'll leave that there. And yeah, so they heard me and they offered to transfer me to a calmer unit. That didn't happen, but they were at least willing to, try to help and try to get me out of there. But we spoke, and we had our difficult conversation, or our confronting conversation, and the doctor was able to push my discharge paperwork through, but not before casually offering the possibility of a bipolar disorder diagnoses. She did not give me the diagnoses, but she said that it could possibly be that, which again, I let it go over my head because I had already done my research and contemplation around the possibility that I may have a mental illness or a disorder that I wasn't familiar with. And I had already told myself, no matter what, I am still deserving of love. I am still deserving of care and self-determination and autonomy over my care. And I get to choose how I identify always. So again, like, I wasn't given the diagnoses, but she did casually mention it as a possibility, which, I took it with a grain of salt and just thanked her for putting through the discharge paper, and I got out of Dodge. But, and my parents, my beautiful parents were there right at discharge, and, we were on our way back to North Florida to start over again. So that was the second time that I was hospitalized. And I know I said a lot about the story and some of the feelings that I had. And I think the main thing that I gathered from reflecting on my story in the past years has really been around accepting that something deeper may be going on, that it's not necessarily tied to a thing or a place or a person or a time in my life or an event as to why I am experiencing this amount of restlessness and anxiety and disconnection with my body that's leading to hospitalizations. You know, going through something once, it's like, okay, you know, I thought I knew what the source was or what the cause was. But then going through it a second time, 18 months later, it felt like, oh, okay. Like, I thought I had some things figured out, but I got some other lessons to learn. And that was a really big, hard pill to swallow, because I'm a person who loves to get the lesson quick. Like, I like to learn my lesson and apply it and land it and, you know, move forward. But again, like, on God's time and on God's plan is how I'm operating, how we're all operating, and being able to take a step back and say, you know what, I don't actually know what's happening to me. I thought I knew. I thought it was related to this type of stress, but maybe it's something more. And I really had to take a step back once I got back home to ground in this new reality that something else could be going on.